Thank you and good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be among the professors and researchers and let's say kind of academic world of the prestigious universities. That was, I think, listed there. And of course, I think that it's certain kind of recognition that I think that, of course, we have tried to understand all kind of research done by industrial ecologists in the kind of academic world. And of course, I think whenever you think of circular economy, and then I think the Commission, you might recall that I think that there was a bit kind of a difficult moment when the Commission very early on decided to withdraw the kind of first proposal on circular economy package that was adopted in the last days of Barroso II. And I think that then it was very much the discussion whether we are now, I think that lowering certain kind of a level of ambitions, or are we raising them? But perhaps I think that one of the questions that of course was very much I think debated, are there reason showing certain understanding of flexibilities, and especially I think that was coming from our member states that who are in a very different kind of a starting point, and of course that was certain kind of one reality that we had to face. But of course I think that whenever the kind of a second package was introduced, of course I think perhaps at least from the Commission civil servant point of view, I think that was perhaps the best kind of example of how the new Commission could work in a de-siloed way, so that I think that we as a kind of representing industry perspective, perhaps I think in the Commission and I think colleagues in the DG Environment, so that I think that we were quite happy family trying to identify what is the kind of a more ambitious, flexible way of introducing these things. And perhaps one of the recognitions was that I think that it's not only about waste and recycling, it's really much more than that. It's very much of the question that I think that how we understand kind of how to make best in economic terms of what is I think that ecologically I think that of course desirable, almost necessary, so that it was very much of encompassing the kind of the most innovative and then competitive business models, such as industrial symbiosis, remanufacturing, and product service integration, and really looking different kind of ways of closing the loop, as was mentioned already by Professor Kennedy, that I think that somewhere we have to confess that perhaps the kind of it's not feasible technically or economically, but I think that of course we try to do it in a very kind of a way that is really making economic sense, and I think there are certain economic incentives for kind of different parts of the value chain really to start to deliver. And I think that that's where we of course recognize that I think that we are far from reaching our full potential yet, and I think that our industrial future in the overall looking that whenever we are discussing about growth and jobs, and I think what is the kind of a European industrial kind of challenges and opportunities, and I guess that where we have been, I think that been good over the years, even during the economic crisis, that I think we have been, I think that in global marketplace really in the lead of highly kind of high value added products and services which are very complex, and I think that they are very innovative and integrated, and I think that's where we have perhaps I think that we really see that I think that's still the path that we in the European kind of industrial environment have to be smart and clean at the same time. And I think that's where I think that we see that circular economy comes close to very many other kind of flagship policy initiatives, being the energy union package or single market strategy and a digital single market strategy, and I think that's where we see certain kind of regulatory and policy framework for our industrial modernization. And as I said, that perhaps the novelty of the second package of the circular economy, I think that was of course waste package in terms of the regulatory kind of framework is very much there. Of course, there are certain adjustments, but perhaps I think that's the action plan consisting of more than 50 different kind of concrete actions where we try to really understand, and I think that propose certain kind of framework conditions, how we can do the business and how we really can drive the investments. And I think that's very much of trying to look at it also from the competitiveness angle, and I think that not losing the sight of the ecological kind of objectives that we are having. And from this perspective, I would say that I think perhaps the first observation is that it's very much of the single market. It's not separate from that, but I think that it's something that we have to really make sure that I think that the single market is working not only in the linear economic models, but also in a circular one. And I think that that's perhaps certain kind of recognition that we are having the challenge to do that, because I think that there are many reasons for that. And for example, that I think that looking back, I think that the waste policies have been very much, I think, designed on national, regional, or even local level. And usually they is then, in spite of the good intentions and I think that innovative ideas, but I think that they are easily coming kind of barriers to access to the market, transport, reuse, recycling of different waste streams, that I think that there are inconsistencies of how we regulate in kind of a union of 28 member states. And of course, I think that there are also certain kind of inconsistencies that we have to address between different type of the regulations we are having in place. And one that we have already now promised to do is our waste products and chemicals policies, that I think that they should really interact much better way. And I think there has been a lot of concrete cases where I think that our chemical legislation and I think that our waste legislation is, especially from the recycling point of view, are not really matching perfectly, or I think that there might be even kind of a more dramatic expressions for that. But of course I think that there are needs for really having developed quality and measurement standards for secondary raw materials, and I think that's where I think we are very much, I think that now are working on. Perhaps the second main observation is that I think that there is a link with the raw materials policy, as Professor Kennedy already raised. And I think making better use of our secondary raw materials, helping increasing the security of supply. And I think you all know that we are the continent of heavily dependent on kind of imports of our raw materials. And I think that perhaps in that respect, of course, the simple waste management is not really enough to meet the kind of our expectations. It's very much of preserving and recovering the most valuable and rare resources that I think that should be our priority. And just coming back from Japan, and I think comparing that how kind of successful they have been, I think that in recycling kind of their mined metals, I guess that we are far from kind of really the best kind of a benchmark in the world. We have a lot to learn from them. Perhaps the final aspect is this recognition of certain specificities, and I think the differences between the sectors and value chains. And I think that there, of course, I think that what is more or less the slogan, that in spite of that we have to have horizontal solutions, we have to have certain kind of a common understanding that where we are aiming at, but the one size doesn't always fit all. And I think that that's where I think we have now, I think that in this action plan, tried really to address the bottlenecks and barriers of the specific sectors. I think we are having, for example, now under development of our strategy for plastics. We are preparing the third report of the critical raw materials. We are developing voluntary guidelines to boost high values recycling in construction sector, and many others like fertilizers. We are now have introduced kind of a new piece of legislation, and I think that there are many more. But perhaps I think then comes the question of how we should implement what we have now put on the table as a kind of a policy plan. I think that there is annex to this action plan that provides the detailed timetable for this implementation. And I think we now have to really operationalize the circular economy in our innovation, funding and investments instruments. And we need to ensure that I think that our small and medium-sized enterprises are not left behind, as is the case today. We can see from the statistics that small and medium-sized enterprises are actually decreasing efforts to use their resources more efficiently. It's on the level of only 25% that are selling their scrap material to another company, and this compared to the US situation, I think that's almost only half what I think that the US companies are doing, and I think that even big European companies are, I think that only on the level of 43%, so that we are not, I think that, doing as well as we are thinking of. And of course, I think that circular economy needs to be inclusive to be successful. And I think that there we have had already from 2014 Green Action Plan for small and medium-sized enterprises, and I think that that's still to be considered as part of the bigger new package. And further, we identified new actions in the package to target them specifically with access to knowledge and technology, because I think that's perhaps the challenge for many smaller companies. And we need to include small businesses into new circular value chains, what usually perhaps are much better managed by the bigger companies, but I think that SMEs are having difficulties in finding their places, and I think that making it profitable really to be in that part of our loop. And I think we have to really look the kind of international dimension. As I told that, I think that that was very much the discussion that I had last week in Japan with our colleagues in Ministry of Industry, Trade and Internet or ICT. And I think that that's where I think we really see that I think that the Japanese are proactively putting that on the agenda of G7, resource efficiency. We are having the UN, we are having the OECD, we are having very many international contexts that we have to use. And I think that to make it a certain kind of a global imperative for all of us and try to work together. And it's also, as I say, that what I see and then we see as a certain kind of industrial future for Europeans, I think that we have to be front runners to take the European solutions on clean and smart kind of technologies to the global marketplace. And I think that we have to really, I think, think and act together. And I think that's where we have to really see that I think that how we do at home and how do we do worldwide. I think that in conclusion, I would say that I think that we abandoned the old way of looking environmental and industrial policy objectives. And I think that's something that we more or less have now, I think that agreed also with the industrial players. I think that everybody is seeing perhaps circular economy more as an opportunity than a burden. I think that's perhaps the good side of the story, and I guess that that's where we of course need to be innovative to find those kind of a win-win solutions. But of course we have to also to recognize that it's not only the happy kind of a story. There are definitely going to be kind of a moments of difficulties, and I think that, but still, I would say that the whole of the preparations and I think comments afterwards of the adoption of the circular economy package, mostly I think that our industrial players are fully, I think that trying to find their place in this kind of a more circular economy than we have today. Thank you.